Hi everyone and welcome to the GCP-Mindset channel. Today we have a special topic to you since we're talking everything real-world evidence. What can it be used for? What are regulatory hurdles? I have a presentation prepared for you and I'm going to show some of the highlights and how they relate back to the medical device environment. So stay tuned.
Welcome to the GCP-Mindset channel and all topics on clinical research.
All right, let's jump right into it. I will start by laying out a little bit of the groundwork of what real-world data is and what real-world evidence is, then talk a little bit about the challenges and the regulatory guidances that we have, and then recap it all by saying what that means for medical device manufacturers out there. Brief introduction to myself. I'm Andreas Beust. I am the CEO of GCP Service and the president of the Association of International CROs, ACROS, and as such, I've worked in a lot of clinical trials over the last years. A lot of it from the point of a statistician, but generally, I've moved into an opportunity where I can shape efficient ways of how to collect data in clinical trials. And how to get a device to the market is one of the things that I'm really concerned with, since there's a lot of regulatory hurdles these days. Now, obviously, real-world evidence is an important topic in that field, and hence I have also delved into it myself. And that's what I want to briefly recap today to get you all an overview of what's out there and whether it's actually as easy as skipping trials and just using real-world evidence to get your device to compliance with medical device regulations. That being said, the background here as well, GCP Service International, we are a full-service CRO, founded 2004, heavily involved in the medical device sphere, also as an investor of a medical device company. Hence, we have a lot of experience with it and also with the pain points that trouble current medical device manufacturers in Europe and those from outside of Europe that want to get their device certified here. So, let's talk about real-world evidence. And you see here on the screen the two definitions that are taken from the FDA guidance on the topic. And real-world data is defined as data relating to patient health status and/or delivery of healthcare as routinely collected. And that is extremely important. It's about the routine collection of data from a variety of sources. Now, real-world evidence itself is all of the clinical evidence that is generated from this real-world data, from this routinely collected information, and we are trying to draw evidence from it. Now, why is this important at all? Why are we talking about it? Not only because there's a lot of players that are currently discussing around it with various degree of information being shared, but also because we have to understand that the vast majority of information we know about ourselves, about our health, and about our general way of addressing evidence in the medical field, be it devices or drugs, is generated outside of these strongly controlled, randomized controlled trials. RCTs do provide the highest level of evidence, but we have a vast amount of information out there, and making good use of it is what we are looking into when we're talking about real-world evidence. Now, doing so also has the side effect that we can speed up evidence generation for new or existing devices because we can tap into what's already there rather than generating something new. And that's the general premise of real-world evidence. What are common sources for real-world evidence, or rather real-world data that we are using to generate the real-world evidence? Here's an overview of some of them, few of them, and I have given an idea of how I think they rate in terms of reliability. And obviously, that's a point of discussion, and your mileage will vary, and we'll also get into that in the next few slides. But generally speaking, it is everything from data generated through wearables or surveys or general databases for healthcare, like e-health records or the THIN database, to registries, to claims databases from your insurance providers. The pinnacle, I guess, of real-world data is observational studies, because they are more prospectively planned and you can plan exactly what type of data you have. For everything else, you're basically taking what's there in most of the settings and have to make do. And hence, there are some problems and challenges that come with it, which I want to dive into today. So, what has changed that we're talking about it? Now, obviously, we have a changing landscape in terms of regulations. More data is required by the medical device regulation in the European Union to show conformity with the general safety and performance requirements. On top of this, we have much more sources for real-world data available and accessible to us, and the methodology to using them and utilizing real-world data to generate real-world evidence has significantly improved over the years. If we are looking at the MDCG 2020-6, you can see also some information on how we deal with it in Europe. Here it is highlighted that real-world data and real-world evidence that's derived from it can be used to support indirect clinical benefits. Now, if you look at the wider passage there that I cited here on the left, you will see that for direct clinical benefits, more robust information is called for. It's not necessary that this has to be the case, but there is an indication that we can say, okay, real-world data and derived real-world evidence can be used to support your regulatory pathway for your medical device. And that's a very strong message. You can see it's from 2020 only. And since there's a lot of unknowns still in the medical device regulation and you need to do more, there's an obvious level of interest now on how to make use of all the data that's available. Real-world evidence has been used in the past already, though. If we are looking at what has been collected before, we know that a lot of safety incidences during post-market surveillance have been collected for medical devices in a very structured manner. There's collection of device deficiencies through incidence reports as well. This is also based on real-world data at the end. And surveys with end users to collect feedback are also a means of generating information. This has been used for a long time already. So this is not to mean this is new, but what we're now talking about is adding on top of it and tapping really into this massive well of data. So with all of that comes some issues, and this is where I want to lay the groundwork, because this all seems fascinating. We have billions of data points out there. We just need to get our hands on them, and then we don't need to run trials. That is something that you may walk away from some presentations that you see out there or articles that deal with real-world evidence. And it's not that easy. While real-world evidence can be a solution to certain problems, it is by no means flawless. And this is what I want to talk about to lay the ground stage of why we need to move forward with regulations and guidances on it. So on the left here, you can see drawbacks of real-world evidence. And the first and most important piece is that a lot of times, let's say observational studies may be a bit aside, but a lot of times the availability and structure of information may vary a lot, especially between sources. If you're going into multiple countries or even multiple locations in the same country, what data is collected, how it is collected, and how it is structured may differ. And that can lead to a lot of missing information. On top of the fact that in the real world, things are not as structured as a visit 1, visit 2, visit 3, where data is really collected in a very stringent manner under a lot of control. It is collected in the way that every patient behaves. Sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. Some may appear more frequently at a doctor's visit. Some may forget to do a follow-up visit that they should do. And in the end, that's the pool of data you have, the pool of information you have. So missingness of information is innately going to happen if you're looking at real-world data. And that needs to be addressed in a structured manner because it is a drawback, because it influences the level of certainty of the conclusions that you draw from it. From a regulatory point of view, lack of randomization and control of confounders is also going to be a point that has to be addressed with real-world evidence. Since the generation of information happens in a non-controlled environment, it means that you don't know what other factors influence the outcomes you're looking at. And this is a true strength of a randomized controlled clinical trial, and a direct weakness for the comparator here in real-world evidence. And this leads to significant influences of different sources of bias, and the ones that you will find mostly discussed in this field are information bias, recall bias, and detection bias. And these things need to be understood and addressed in your planning for when you are desiring to use real-world evidence. So it can sometimes feel, and this can also primarily be the feeling of the regulatory bodies, that using real-world evidence can be a bit of a gamble. Your data source can be good, but it can also be bad. And you need a very robust intrinsic system to judge when it is good and good enough to support your claims, to support the performance and safety of your device, and when it is not. And this is really what's at the core of when and how to use real-world evidence. And I want to give an example because the right approach really matters. In the period of 2003 to 2008, a couple of publications were released on the drug side of things, but it still relates to real-world evidence. The foundation is that there has been a call for usage of progestin and estrogen concomitantly in patients to positively impact coronary heart disease. And there is this study from the randomized control trial from the Women's Health Initiative that published their data in 2003. And they concluded that, in fact, rather than reducing the risk for CHD, it increased it upon combined treatment. Now, this was so controversial because it refuted prior observational data. And this observational data indicated a reduced risk for CHD. Now, here you have real-world evidence being used to drive medical decision-making, and then a randomized control trial coming in and saying, actually, the picture is not as clear. And so refuting the common standards based on a trial that sort of refutes the observations that were made before in routine care, that was obviously something that needed to be investigated further. And there's a couple of publications after, and all of them you'll also find at the end of this presentation or linked down below. There were a couple of publications that addressed this reason for why there was such a difference between observational and structured and controlled data. And what eventually emerged was that there was a lack of comparability of these two data sources, first of all, which also relates back to the observational period, and that a lot of early observational data right after start of the combined treatment was missing in the observational data set, but was present in the structured randomized control trial, and that also some of the confounders weren't properly addressed. Now, taking that example of shaping regulatory perception that observational data may not always be trustworthy, and let's move forward 15 years from the last publication there to 2023. The recent updates to the most recent publication on how to emulate randomized control trials using observational data has been published last year. And this is a study where 32 randomized control trials were sort of emulated based on observational data set. And they tried to be as close as possible to the original conditions of these randomized control trials, but using data that already exists, that has already been captured before. They tried to match the patients, make sure that the observational period is the same, that the endpoints matched, that the in- and exclusion criteria were adhered to, and that generally patients from the observational data pool were used that are similar to those seen in the actual performed randomized control trials. Now, the fascinating thing here is that using this thorough approach to try to emulate randomized controlled conditions from the observational data led to a 75% chance of emulating the correct statistical significance in these emulated trials which were generated out of real-world data. In fact, if you're looking at the well-matched randomized control trials, which was around half of this overall pool, you go up to 94%, which showed the same outcome. And this goes to show that although the data is generated observationally and in an environment in which basically they are generated as per standard of care and in real-world conditions and with a lot of factors influencing them, if you know exactly what you want to look for and you're very thorough in defining your methods, your population, confounders, and everything that can impact the outcome, we have good means statistically to replicate, sort of, a randomized control trial. The problem, therefore, lies in establishing the right method, how to move from a pool of data of which you don't know what factors are included to addressing the right research question using the right type of data. And that's really the challenge around real-world evidence and how it has evolved over the years. Now, let's take a step back and see, knowing this, how is the regulatory perspective on it? Because that's what matters. We can have as fancy a method as we want, as long as there are regulators that will not embrace the real-world evidence, there's a lot of effort that can go into it, which may end up not being fruitful, and there may again be a call for using randomized controlled trials to drive the evidence generation. Now, if we look at some of the core documents in some of the regions, I think that are a bit more prominent to us in Europe and potentially also to our audience, we see, for example, the US, Europe, and UK here on the right, and a list of guidance documents. And if you go from top to bottom, you really don't see any regulations because there are none. And if you look at Europe, well, you have a statement, you have a strategy document, and that's about it. So we have very little to go off of. And I encourage you to review this publication from Bala et al. For more details on it. Now, if we look at what really speaks to the methodological approach to real-world evidence usage to get your medical device to the market, you can see here the FDA guidance on real-world data and real-world evidence to support regulatory decision-making, as well as a draft guidance on externally controlled trials. These are more advanced usages of real-world evidence, which could be useful, and there the FDA has something to give. In terms of MDCG 2020-6, I already cited it before, there's very little information though on the European level. So what are we left with in Europe? An EMA vision statement on how to use real-world evidence and an experience report that is honestly not very encouraging. This experience report, and you can also look at it, contains information on how real-world evidence was used in regulatory decision-making. That sounds nice, but if you look at the cases where it was used, they only used it to understand better the incidences of certain indications across Europe. That's it. There was no support for claims of efficacy in this case because it's EMA, so it's for the medicinal product side. There was no support for safety that was really incorporated. It was only for the occurrence of these indications across Europe where it was used. So there is a gap. And I am still going to cite this experience report here because it highlights the level of discussion where we are at in Europe at the moment. And you can see this is a report on real-world evidence framework to support EU regulatory decision-making. Sounds encouraging. It was released last year. And there is a point that speaks to usefulness for decision-making of real-world data and real-world evidence. And the first point clearly lays out that real-world data is used in a supportive function. That means you already have evidence and you add a bit of evidence on top to support regulatory decision-making. And in the end, it really requires a very robust description of how it was generated and evaluated to make use of it. And you really need to know all about the data source characteristics. On the other side of the point, if you're looking to the FDA, you have a similar report, examples of real-world evidence used in medical device regulatory decision-making. So this is more to the topic of medical devices. And here you have actually a long list of examples how it can also work well and how you can really incorporate real-world evidence for the development of your medical devices. Which means that I am very hopeful that we are going to move in this direction in the EU as well, seeing how the FDA already embraced it. And in a few years' time, I think we are also going to be able to utilize it a bit better, but we need more guidance for it. This is where we are at the moment. So from a manufacturer's point of view of a medical device, at the moment, we have very limited regulatory guidance in Europe. That's it. There is a missing structure about what's required to incorporate real-world evidence in your pre-market application. That means to get the CE mark or to support staying on the market as is. And because of this missing structure, there are going to be regional differences that you're going to encounter. And sometimes that can even be national differences between whether you go to South Germany or North Germany and how it's received. Obviously, at the end, what matters is notified bodies, not for when you conduct a trial. But even there can be a lack of commonality in decision-making simply because the regulatory framework is not precise enough to guarantee that you can move forward with a low-risk, high-confidence approach. And that's really what, from a manufacturer's point of view, is detrimental to progression, because taking high risks of using real-world evidence may not pay off, and there's only one shot that a lot of especially smaller or mid-sized companies have. So what does that mean now in conclusion as we're wrapping this up? Is it a holy grail? Definitely not. And this is an impression that sometimes you can get when you're listening to people talking about how to use real-world evidence. It holds a wealth of information. It has a lot of good to it that can also help us speed up development of new products or help keep existing products on the market. But you need to approach it in a very structured manner. There is a low level of regulatory guidance and structure, which means the risk is high for now. And that means that especially the advanced usages of real-world evidence, for example, as an external control group for your trial, or to even completely skip your trials and run virtual emulated trials, is not supported to this degree yet. It's possible potentially, but it's going to depend on who you're talking with and how good your methodology is and how good your data source is. At the end, randomized controlled trials still generate the highest degree of evidence, and therefore think about real-world evidence more to support and build upon existing evidence rather than being a sideline that can avoid prospectively generating evidence under controlled conditions. Now, is it useful? Absolutely, but you need to understand when and how to support your existing evidence with real-world data and real-world evidence. So the approach should be to define a very specific and correct research question and move from there to assessing your data sources, not the other way around. What we see too much is that there is data available and the question arises, what can we use it for? This inherently flaws your statistical methods and the information that you derive from it. If you want to do it right, start with the research question. Then you may de-risk your interpretation at the end. So start from the research question, go to your data sources and see if they support your research question accurately. If they don't, you're going to have problems. If you find the right data sources, plan around bias and missing data because they're going to be there and they need to be addressed. And so plan from the beginning and see if it still holds up in terms of your research question. And then when it comes to interpretation, to summarize it while considering all of these weaknesses, which there are and which you will be challenged on, and highlight how they can support your existing evidence, be it from literature, be it from prior clinical trials, be it from passively collected information on your devices, understand if what you have is enough or if you should supplement it with a survey, and then really move forward with it. Have the right arguments from the beginning that can really form the foundation for result validity in your report. And as you're sitting there now, maybe you already have a device, maybe you already have a device on the market, consider proactively setting up means to collect real-world data to support your post-market clinical follow-up. If you already know now that you will have to generate additional information, why not set up a registry? Why not plan with an investigator that is intrigued by your product to set up simply an observational study where patients are included, you already collect some data. It will bring you the advantage of having a high-quality data source few years down the line when you may need it. So that's my strong recommendations for you. Here are the sources of everything I talked about now. There's more out there, but these are the highlights I have put in my presentation. And I know that there can be a lot of questions around opportunities that real-world evidence holds, what are the challenges and how can you address it? And we are happy to help. So feel free to reach out either to me directly, my LinkedIn profile is here and also highlighted on the right, or write us to info@gcpservice.com or visit our website. We're happy to support you in case of your questions. And I hope I could bring some clarity to this whole topic to you, and that you're going to successfully use and incorporate real-world evidence to support your medical device in the future. And with that, I wish you a lovely rest of the day wherever you are, and we'll see you here soon.